Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. So go on and click and check it out. I would greatly appreciate it. Everything is custom made to order. It's right there for you on that link. All right, so audio platforms. I'm on Spreaker, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, just to name a few. All right, so this is, as I said, about art. So in this episode, I'm going to go into the aspects of Renaissance art, that period of. Well, I'm debating between Italian Renaissance and so forth, but I think it's just best for me to center around the Renaissance art as a whole here. All right, here we go. All right, here are some facts about Renaissance art, and I'm going to get into my thoughts. So, the Renaissance art was, of course, a period between the 14th and 16th century. So, here are some aspects or key facts about it. So, linear perspective. The technique was developed by Filippo Brunelleschi and perfected by artists. For instance, from the big known artist here is Leonardo da Vinci, which allowed for the creation of illusion in 3D depth. This realism was never seen before in the West. So light and shadow. Artists began to represent light and shadow more accurately, creating the illusion of volume and texture. This technique, known as chiaroscuro, was used to a dramatic effect by artists like Caravaggio. So, oil paintings. The use of oil painting was mastered in the 15th century in the Netherlands, of course, allowed for brighter, more intense colors. So, Raphael's work in oil is a notable example of this. Humanism, and I would add on to that, when they were saying about the Netherlands, we get to the Dutch, and then we get to the Peter the Elder, Peter Borrell, things of that nature. I'll go into more depth about that, about my thought process, because I talked about his work, before in a previous podcast. So after this, I'll get into all of that. All right, so humanism and realism. So Renaissance art shifted from being primarily religious oriented to focusing on humanistic and realism. So depicting human behavior and emotions in dynamic poses and realistic landscapes. So innovative artists. This period saw the emergence of influential artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. So Leonardo was known for his naturalistic portrayal of the world and his numerous unfinished projects. Michelangelo was initially reluctant to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling, but created one of the most iconic works in art history. So the patron. Wealthy patrons, including the Medici family in Florence and the Catholic Church, played a significant role in commissioning, supporting such Renaissance art. So techniques and styles. Renaissance art style included oil and tempera paintings, sculptures, and still life portraits, which have been widely used since the Renaissance. And are often considered the norm in today's standard of art. So, impact of modern art. The techniques and styles developed during the Renaissance continue to influence modern art, as seen in contemporary works that reference Renaissance art, such as, for instance, they go on to Beyonce's album cover, and they also talk about Ariana Grande's music video. So, artistic innovation. The Renaissance art marked a time of rebirth, emphasis, hence Renaissance, that means rebirth. So, in the rise of renowned artists who create not only realistic but also complex and emotionally charged works. So, I'm going to get into my thoughts about all this. Here we go. All right, so my perspectives. So, and I'll give you a summary here about the aspects of the Renaissance. So, for me, this is how I break it down. Got the pre-Renaissance. You got the present when it occurring Renaissance, and post-Renaissance. So in the pre-era, this is the aspects when we get figures like talking about breaking away from the traditions where art was really made for the aspects of religious purposes. And you get poetry and you get imagery, like, for instance, for the example I'm giving here is in the insert of the poetry, that's probably the Odyssey or the Iliad or something, with the Dante's Inferno. And with that, with the prose, with the aspects of the internal struggle of men, and then, being aware of your surroundings within that, and of the governmental structures and the problems with the structures and the problems with the society, how the governmental structures is impacting the society, the citizens, and then also with the religious purposes of how that's impacting everyone. And the writer really delved within that, and it was, the literary standpoint of it and the artistry within that, you could really visualize every aspect of what the journey that was about, of the descending into the layers of hell, and what impact and what fate that means as you descend more and more into the abyss, and what are the metaphors about that. And so, you get the early works of the Renaissance in that sense. And unfortunately, it didn't last very long because of the aspects from my recollection of understanding and research, is because of illnesses and people not having the time to, and the economic structure downfall of that, people just not having the time to pay attention to their surroundings. Getting in that impact of, you don't know what's going to happen that day. You have to have that survival mode. Excuse me just a minute. And then out of that, you get, and I'm going to expel into that and get into more details about the facts of the matter. And of course, the source will be provided for you. You get the Renaissance as we know it, and then, extend out into the Renaissance, post-Renaissance, into the aspects of the periods and the time of Shakespearean prose and thoughts about the world and the aspects of that, and then the type of art form that came out of that era too. All right, so when we get into the aspects of the Renaissance and the time frame that is familiar, that's the general consensus of what people think about when they visualize the Renaissance. It's quite interesting because that this time was the aspects of setting up the foundation of modernity. And so what I mean by this is now we get the aspects of patrons not paying or commissioning works of art just for the aspects of religious purposes it may be, or so forth. They're really in the giving patrons to art for the sake for art purposes. It's quite interesting in the aspects that now artists have the full range to express what they see around them, have a deeper sense of depth about the culture in which they live in, instead of just only seeing everything from what the church is saying and thinking and wanting them to visualize. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great to have that aspects of religion and culture and presenting to the masses. But, it's nice to have that variety in there with different subject matter, other than, real religion here. And so, you get aspects of families like the Medici family, which was a very, very, very heavy influence of why the Renaissance flourished so much, especially the Italian Renaissance here. And you get heavy hitters like Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Michelangelo, and so forth. And then they started to play and display the aspects of the human form. And then you get that quote of the Renaissance man, and that was really associated with Leonardo da Vinci, because Leonardo da Vinci was a jack of all trades, and he would just try and understand all kinds of skillmanship in order to develop his artistry. And that's something. And then when you get into Michelangelo and Raphael was very, of the Enlightenment, of, seeing things from excuse me just a minute. The Raphaels and everything like him from that school. And then, Michelangelo too. And then we get into Leonardo da Vinci, but merging that good. I'm going to get back to Michelangelo. And then merging Raphael and Leonardo da Vinci, merging the aspects of depth and perception with playing with linear perspective, playing with color palettes, color form of warm and cool, cool more in the forefront and warmth in the back, to also create this sense of depth and illusion. Now, when you get to Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, he was commissioned to work, and of course create religious imagery for the Sistine Chapel. He wasn't a fan of doing something like that. He did what he was commissioned to do. But then he also had the freedom and range to put a different light in the aspects here of the depiction of the human form. So what I mean, that was quite radical for the time to, play with the imagery of religious figures. We get in the aspects of Adam, and then we get in the aspects of David in the human form, and how it was really some would argue that very sexualized. Some would say that's just the epitome of what would be considered his statue, or considered the aspects of his form and his glory, and his depiction of man in that state of the heroic figure of David, and everything else in the aspects of Adam and God and the religion and so forth, of the aspects of the impact that Christianity has and has on the entire Western world. When you consider the aspects of Constantine being the forerunner of spreading religion into the Western world. Yeah. And all of these concepts are, welcomed and thought of and not ridiculed because of the Enlightenment period that was bestowed upon people in this era. Now, when we get in that, some, and then that's interesting about history too, because, when you talk about the medieval period and so forth, it wasn't all stark and nothing being evolved. It was a lot of instances where there was great achievements from an intellectual point of view. But it's quite interesting when there's a consensus of developmental progress here. And then when you get into aspects of art and literature, and in particular with art and the aspects of the Shakespearean period, everything is very, aesthetically eloquent and delicate looking in the aspects of that form. And then, I think Shakespeare really embodied the aspects of the thought patterns, the perspective that people were thinking at that time. When we get into the aspects of art and literature, and then we get into the imagery and the art with what people were thinking about, when you get in the aspects of man and the complexity and the aspects of chivalry and in the aspects of nobility and so forth, and you get the pastoral works, and then you get imagery like this when you see Maid Marian and stuff like that, and being retold in paintings and figures. And then when you get into the aspects of work like Shakespearean work like Romeo and Juliet and so forth, and Taming of the Shrew and so forth, playing with the aspects of purity and modernity, And then when we go into the Netherlands and the heavy hitters of Dutch, very prolific Dutch painters, like, for instance, Rembrandt and Peter Bruegel, they got that, they're two different artists, but the aspects of really taking a glimpse onto everyday life and amplifying, what's going on in their culture is really present. And I think the Dutch really did that well with representing that in the Renaissance era. All right, with all this said, I'm going to expand out with some more details and wrap it all up. Here we go. Okay, so scholars no longer believe that the Renaissance marked an abrupt break from medieval values, as is suggested by French word Renaissance, literally meaning rebirth. Rather, historical sources suggest that interest in nature and humanistic learning, individualism were already present in the late medieval period and became dominant in the 15th and 16th century. In Italy, concurrently with social and economic changes such as the secularism of daily life, the rise of rational money, credit, economy, and greatly increased social mobility. In Italy, the Renaissance proper was preceded by an important pro-Renaissance in the late 13th century and the early 14th centuries, which drew inspiration from Franciscan radicalism. St. Francis had rejected the formal scholarism of the prevailing Christian theology and gone out among the poor, praising the beauties and spiritual value of nature. As example, inspired Italian artists and poets to make pleasure in the world around them. The most famous artist of the pro-Renaissance period was Guido di Bonte. Reveals a new pictorial style that depends on clear, simple structure and great psychological aspects rather than on a flat, linear decorativeness and the hierarchy of compositions of his predecessor and contemporaries, such as Florentine painter Chibone and Sicilian painter Duco and Simone Martini. The great poet Dante, as I was saying, lived about the same time as Guido, and his poetry shows a similar concern with inward experiences and the subtle shades and variation of human nature. Although his Divine Comedy belongs in the Middle Ages, and its plan and ideas, its subject, spirit, and power of expression look forward to the Renaissance. So this is what I'm saying about the aspects of how art imitates life. So it's quite interesting with the aspects of religion reflecting this on to the aspects of the Renaissance. So breaking it down, this is what I take from it. So, when you get into the aspects of what religion can bring to your life, it can really give you the aspects of helping you really see the world around you of what it is, and the ups and downs and just everything in between, and you just really get a really good sense of the aspects of the human condition and how that was picked up upon artists and poets and that enlightened them to see this and inspire them. That's truly something to the aspects of how spirituality and art and how that can, give a great sense of meaning and depth to things. I'm sorry, y'all. Just still with my allergies. I'm so sorry. Hold on just a minute. Okay, so all right, so and also for an example, Giovanni Boccio forgive me for the pronunciation of that, also belonged to his proto-Renaissance period, both which he and others like him, they brought their extensive studies of Latin literature and through their writings in their vernacular. Unfortunately, the terrible plague of 1348 and subsequent civil war submerged both the revival of humanistic study and the growing interest in individualism and naturalism, which revealed the works of Guido and Dante. The spirit of the Renaissance did not surface again until the beginning of the 15th century. As I was saying about the aspects, how living in survival mode after all these unfortunate and these detrimental situations can bring. So in 1401, a competition was held at Florence to award the commission for bronze doors to be placed on the baptistry of San Giovanni, defended by the goldsmith of the painter Lorenzo Ghiberti, Filippo Brunelleschi, and Donatello left for Rome, where they immersed themselves in the study of ancient architecture and sculpture. When they returned to Florence and began to put their knowledge into practice, the rationalized art of the ancient world was reborn. The founder of Renaissance painting was Masaccio. The intellectual aspects of his conceptions and the mortality of his compositions and a high degree of naturalism in his work. It was pivotal for the aspects of what we think about when we reflect on Renaissance painting. So the succeeding generation of artists, Piero della Francesca and Andrea de Verrocchio, pressed forward with researches into linear and aerial perspectives and anatomy, which developed a style of scientific naturalism. All right, so I'm going to end on this note, and I'd like to know what you all think about the aspects of the Renaissance and how that impact society. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'll have those links provided for you in this episode. And if you want to read more, I will have that source listed for you in this episode too. All right, so this reaches the end of the Heart Ring Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care. Bye-bye.